Welcome to Barbara's Bulletin, the podcast where we dive into the most pressing stories from around the world. I'm your host, Barbara, and I'm glad you're joining me today. We're starting off with a complex and sensitive topic that has been making headlines for months now: the conflict between Israel and Palestine. The situation in Gaza has taken a devastating turn, with reports of civilian casualties and infrastructure damage mounting by the day. According to recent updates, EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen has condemned Israel's strikes on civilian sites in Gaza as abhorrent and called for an immediate restoration of aid delivery in line with humanitarian principles. This comes after a series of deadly airstrikes killed at least 52 people in the Gaza Strip, including 33 in a school-turned-shelter. The European Commission President emphasized that while Israel has the right to security and self-defense, the disproportionate use of force against civilians cannot be justified under humanitarian and international law. The EU has been struggling to have an impact on the conflict, but momentum is growing to ramp up pressure on Israel, with 17 out of 27 member states backing a review of their association agreement over alleged human rights abuses in Gaza. It's essential to acknowledge that this is a deeply complex issue, with multiple perspectives and historical context. We'll continue to monitor the situation and provide updates as more information becomes available. In related news, Israel has eased its blockade on Gaza, allowing some aid trucks to enter the region. However, the amount of aid that has entered the densely populated coastal enclave is only a fraction of what's needed, with the UN estimating that 500–600 trucks are required daily. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains dire, with thousands of Palestinians killed or injured since the conflict escalated. We'll be keeping a close eye on developments and exploring different aspects of this story in future episodes. We'll be right back with more of today's top news on Barbara's Bulletin. Welcome back to Barbara's Bulletin. We're halfway through our program today, and I'm excited to share some important updates from around the world with you. In this segment, we'll be covering a range of stories that caught my attention, from security cooperation agreements to maritime research disputes. Firstly, let's start with Japan, where Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has agreed to advance security cooperation with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. The two leaders discussed a project to jointly develop a next-generation fighter jet with Britain, as well as various economic issues affecting the global economy. This move is seen as a significant step towards strengthening ties between Japan and Italy, and we'll be keeping an eye on how this partnership develops. In other news, Japan has accused China of conducting unnotified maritime scientific research within its exclusive economic zone around Okinatori Island in the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese Coast Guard spotted a Chinese maritime survey vessel extending a wire into the waters, which Tokyo claims is a violation of international law. China has not commented on the incident, but this development is likely to add to existing tensions between the two nations. Meanwhile, India and Pakistan have been engaged in a drones arms race, with both countries utilizing unmanned aerial vehicles at scale against each other for the first time. The fighting halted after the U.S. brokered a ceasefire, but analysts predict that this new frontier in warfare will only continue to escalate. We'll be monitoring this situation closely, as it has significant implications for regional security. Closer to home, Japan's police have issued a warning over toy pistols that can fire live rounds. These toys are designed to look like real guns and can be easily modified to fire actual bullets, posing a serious risk to public safety. Authorities are urging parents to be vigilant and report any suspicious activity to prevent accidents or worse. Finally, in economic news, Japan has lost its top creditor status for the first time in 34 years, according to recent reports. This shift is largely due to changes in global trade patterns and the impact of U.S. tariffs on the world economy. We'll be exploring the implications of this development in more depth in future episodes. That's all for now. Stay tuned for our final story of the day, right here on Barbara's Bulletin. Welcome back to Barbara's Bulletin. I'm your host, Barbara. As we conclude today's program, we're shifting our focus to a critical issue that demands international attention: the ongoing conflict in South Sudan and the impending decision by the United Nations Security Council on whether to lift the arms embargo imposed on the country. This is a story of profound human suffering, political instability, and the quest for peace in one of Africa's most troubled nations. As we've been following, the United Nations Security Council is set to review the arms embargo on South Sudan, which was initially imposed in 2018 in an effort to stem the flow of weapons that have fueled the country's devastating civil war. The conflict has resulted in thousands of deaths, the displacement of millions, and unimaginable human rights abuses. Despite a fragile peace agreement, violence has persisted, and the situation remains precarious. The call by some African members of the UN Security Council to lift the embargo is based on the argument that it could facilitate the unification of government and opposition forces and reform the security sector. However, this stance is not universally supported. Critics argue that lifting the embargo would only serve to escalate the violence by introducing more weapons into an already volatile situation. They point to the appalling human rights record of the South Sudanese army and other armed groups, which have been implicated in war crimes, including attacks on civilians and medical facilities. The use of improvised incendiary weapons in aerial attacks, killing dozens and injuring many, including children, underscores the urgency of maintaining strict controls on arms transfers to South Sudan. The international community is faced with a daunting question: how can peace be fostered in a country where the very forces tasked with protecting civilians have been responsible for such egregious abuses? The African Union's goal of silencing the guns by 2030, aiming to end all wars and violent conflicts on the continent, stands in stark contrast to the current realities in South Sudan. The push to lift the arms embargo seems at odds with this ambitious goal, as it risks exacerbating the conflict rather than resolving it. As we consider the path forward for South Sudan, it's crucial that the international community prioritizes the protection of civilians and supports measures that genuinely promote peace and stability. This includes enforcing the arms embargo and ensuring that any efforts to reform the security sector are accompanied by strict accountability for human rights abuses. In conclusion, the situation in South Sudan is a stark reminder of the complexities and challenges of conflict resolution in our world today. As we navigate these issues, it's essential that we remain informed, engaged, and committed to advocating for peace, justice, and human rights. That's all for today's Barbara's Bulletin. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, stay engaged.